There are stories that begin in thunder and chaos, the kind that start with sirens, tears, or confessions screamed into the night. And then there are stories like this one, the kind that begin in silence. It began with an envelope, a plain, cream-colored one, its corners softened by time, its flaps sealed shut by something more than glue, by hesitation. It lay tucked inside a box of old books in a quiet secondhand shop on the corner of a narrow cobblestone street. The shop was small, the kind that always smelled faintly of paper and tea, where the air felt like it had absorbed every whisper of the people who'd ever come inside. Ethan, the shop's owner, had found the letter one Tuesday morning while unpacking a recent donation. He wasn't a man who rushed things. His days moved like the turning of pages, steady, deliberate. He stacked the books by theme: poetry, travel, forgotten classics. And then, beneath a worn copy of collected sonnets, he found the envelope. It was unremarkable except for the name written across it in soft looping script, Eleanor. He held it for a long moment, thumb brushing across the faded ink. There was no stamp, no return address, no date. He wondered how long it had been waiting, how many years it had sat in someone's drawer, unsent, unspoken. Outside, the street was half awake. The rain had started just before dawn, and now the windows glowed faintly gold as sunlight pushed through the clouds. The world outside hummed, footsteps on wet pavement, the sound of a bell from the bakery next door. Inside, there was only quiet. Ethan turned the letter over once more, then placed it on the counter beside the register. He told himself he wouldn't open it. Some things weren't meant to be read by strangers. But even as he turned away, he knew the letter would not leave his mind. It would sit there in the corner of his thoughts, whispering softly. That night, after closing the shop, Ethan poured himself a cup of tea and sat by the window upstairs. The streetlights cast long ribbons of light through the glass, and the rain returned in thin, whispering sheets. He thought about the letter, who Eleanor might have been, who might have written to her. Lovers? Friends? Someone who never got to say what they meant? He imagined 1,000 different stories, but none of them felt quite right. Before going to bed, he went back down to the shop. He stood by the counter, looking at the envelope under the glow of the hanging lamp. For a moment, he considered tearing it open, but instead, he smiled faintly, turned off the light, and whispered to the darkness. Tomorrow, maybe tomorrow. The shop fell silent again, the kind of silence that carries memory. And somewhere in the city, perhaps not far away, another envelope, one with his name, waited quietly for him too. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the world clean and quiet. Ethan woke to the soft light slipping through his blinds, a kind of pale gold that made the dust in the air shimmer. For a few seconds, he stayed still, listening to the city stretch itself awake. A car passing below, the squeak of a bicycle, the clinking of cups in the cafe across the street. He brewed coffee, still half in the gentle fog of sleep, and carried it downstairs. The shop was cold, the kind of morning chill that made wood creak and floorboards sigh. He switched on the old hanging light by the counter. The letter was still there, but there was something else beside it. Another envelope. Smaller. White. New. He froze, cup halfway to his lips. The front of the envelope was blank. No name, no markings, just a seal pressed into the flap. A wax seal, faint but deliberate, the imprint of a rose. He hadn't heard the bell above the door, hadn't seen anyone come in. The shop had been locked all night. He reached out and picked it up. The paper was smooth, almost warm, like it had been held not long ago. For a moment, he considered laughing. Maybe one of his friends had stopped by, playing a prank. But then he noticed something that made his breath still. The handwriting on the seal was nearly identical to the one on the first letter. He turned it over in his hands, then opened it carefully. Inside, there was only one line, written in black ink that bled slightly into the paper. Sometimes, what we lose doesn't disappear. It only learns to wait. Ethan read it twice. 3 times. The handwriting wasn't just familiar, it was hers. Eleanor. His hands trembled slightly as he set the note down beside the other envelope. The past he thought he had left behind seemed to flicker alive again in that quiet morning air. The bell over the door chimed, and a customer walked in, an elderly woman with silver hair tucked beneath a scarf. She smiled, talking about the weather, asking for a book on wildflowers. Ethan did his best to smile back, to play the part of the calm shopkeeper. But his mind was far away, wrapped around that single line of ink. By noon, the shop was empty again. He looked out the window at the wet pavement, the passing umbrellas, and wondered, could it really be her? Could she have been here, standing outside while he slept just a few floors above? The thought seemed impossible. Eleanor had been gone for years. She had vanished without warning, leaving behind nothing but silence. No goodbye, no explanation. And yet, the handwriting, the tone, the quiet ache behind the words, it was her. He knew it in the same way you know the sound of a loved one's voice even after decades. He spent the rest of the day distracted. Every time the doorbell rang, his heart jolted with the same ridiculous hope. But no one came who matched the image in his mind. That smile, that soft light in her eyes, the way she'd always tilted her head when she laughed. When evening came, he locked up early and sat by the window of his apartment, the 2 letters spread before him. The city below glowed in soft amber light, and rain threatened again in the distance. He wondered if he should write back. To what, though? To whom? He took out a blank sheet of paper, dipped his pen into ink, and wrote just one sentence. If you're still waiting, I never stopped. He folded it, sealed it with tape. No rose, just a plain edge, and left it on the counter by the old one before going to bed. It felt like the right kind of madness, the kind that made him feel alive again after years of being half asleep. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly, and somewhere, maybe nearby, someone smiled at the sound. That night, Ethan dreamed in color for the first time in years. He saw sunlight caught in the dust of old pages, a hand reaching for a book, laughter echoing between shelves. When he woke, the details dissolved like watercolor in rain, leaving only a feeling, warmth, bittersweet and sharp around the edges. By the time he opened the shop, the world outside had turned to early summer. The morning light lay soft across the pavement, and the smell of lilacs drifted in through the half-open door. He tried to tell himself it was just coincidence, a trick of memory, someone playing games. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. The letters weren't random. They were breadcrumbs. And if there was one thing Ethan had always been good at, it was following trails. He took out the 2 envelopes again, laid them side by side on the counter. His name was nowhere on them, but they felt like his somehow, as if written directly into the rhythm of his life. He thought back to the first time he'd heard her name, not on paper, but in her own voice. It had been 5 summers ago, in this same bookshop, when he wasn't the owner but just another customer hiding from the heat. The old shopkeeper, Mr. Klein, had known every book and every regular by name. That afternoon, the ceiling fan had turned lazily above their heads, and the sunlight had painted gold rectangles across the floor. That was when she walked in. Eleanor. She was wearing a navy blue dress and carried a camera around her neck. She had that kind of energy that made a place feel alive, the quiet confidence of someone who saw beauty in things everyone else overlooked. She went straight to the counter, smiled at Mr. Klein, and asked for a map of forgotten places. Ethan remembered because he'd laughed. He'd never heard of such a title and thought she was joking. But she'd turned toward him, eyes bright, and said, "It's a travel book, but not about geography. It's about memory, about all the places we leave behind." That single sentence had done something strange to him. It was the first time he'd ever heard someone describe his heart out loud. They started talking, first about books, then about cities, then about everything. She told him she was a photographer working on a project about time, portraits of abandoned houses, forgotten bridges, untended gardens. She wanted to capture the beauty in decay. Ethan told her he worked in publishing, though the truth was, he was growing tired of it. Editing the same shallow manuscripts, pretending to care about stories that felt empty. She told him maybe he should write instead of edit. "You sound like someone who has something worth saying," she'd said, almost teasing. They met again the next day, and the one after that. Soon, it became a habit neither of them named. She'd bring photographs, he'd bring tea. Sometimes they wouldn't talk at all. They'd just sit on the floor between shelves, reading side by side, their shoulders nearly touching. And then, one afternoon, she left a note tucked inside a book he'd lent her. Letters of Rilke. It said, "If I don't see you tomorrow, it's because I've gone looking for another forgotten place. But I'll leave you something to find me again." He didn't understand what she meant until the next week, when he found the first of her letters, folded neatly inside the pocket of his coat, hanging by the door of the shop. A note, written in her looping script. "Every story begins the moment we decide to look for it." He kept that note for years, long after she disappeared. Now, looking at the two new letters, his chest tightened. The handwriting was exactly the same pressure on the pen, the same delicate slant. No forgeries, no tricks. She was back, or she wanted him to think so. Either way, it didn't matter. The ache she'd left behind all those years ago was awake again. He ran his finger across the rose seal, closed his eyes, and whispered her name to the still air of the shop, half in hope, half in disbelief. "Eleanor." The wind outside shifted, brushing the open door, rustling the pages of a book on the front display. And then, almost too faint to be real, he heard it. The sound of a bell, distant but familiar, the soft echo of the same laugh he'd once known by heart. He looked up sharply, heart pounding, but the street outside was empty. Still, something had changed. He could feel it. Somewhere, this story had just started again. By morning, the rain had come back, soft as a whisper against the window panes. Ethan opened the shop early that day. He liked the quiet hours before the first customers arrived, when the world was still half asleep, when time seemed slower and gentler. He made a pot of coffee, turned the key in the front door, and listened to the small bell above the frame sing its single note into the empty street. The smell of damp air and roasted beans mingled with the scent of books and pine polish. Everything felt still, contained, like the world was holding its breath. And there it was again, another envelope. This one sat on the counter beside yesterday's too, pale gray this time, the rose seal pressed deeper into the wax, as if whoever left it had hesitated before setting it down. He stood staring at it, heart thudding faintly. He hadn't left the door unlocked. The windows were bolted. No one had the spare key. Yet somehow, the letter was here, waiting for him, as if it had simply appeared out of thin air. Ethan broke the seal. Inside was a folded page, blank on one side. The other side carried another message in that familiar, flowing hand. "Do you remember the light in the shop that day? The way the dust floated between us, golden and slow? You said time was a trick of the heart. Maybe you were right." He sat down heavily on the old stool behind the counter, the page trembling slightly between his fingers. His heart ached, not sharply, but like an old wound quietly remembering how to hurt. He looked around the shop, scanning the corners, half expecting to see her standing there, camera in hand, smiling. But there was no one. Only the soft hum of the refrigerator in the back and the distant rhythm of passing cars outside. For the rest of the day, he tried to work, tried to act normal, greeting customers, sorting books, brewing tea. But every sound seemed amplified, every movement slower. He found himself glancing at the door each time the bell rang, hoping and dreading all at once. By late afternoon, the clouds had thickened. The rain grew heavier, drumming softly on the glass roof at the back of the shop. Ethan stood by the window and watched the water run down in thin silver trails. In the reflection, he caught sight of his own face, older than he remembered, lonelier too. He whispered to the empty air, "What do you want from me?" The question hung there, unanswered. When he finally closed the shop, the street was dark and quiet. The lamplight outside flickered against the puddles, and the scent of wet earth drifted in through the half-open door. He took the letters upstairs with him, laid them carefully on his desk, and stared at them for a long while. For envelopes now. For messages. Each one a small piece of something unfinished. He reached for his journal, the one he hadn't written in for years, and opened to a blank page. His handwriting felt unfamiliar at first, stiff from disuse, but soon the words came easily. "Eleanor, I don't know if you'll ever see this, or if I'm writing to a ghost, but I need to know why you left. I need to know why now, after all this time, you've come back to me this way." He paused, pen hovering over the paper. The rain outside was steady now, no longer a drizzle but a soft, endless curtain of sound. He wrote one more line. "If you're trying to say goodbye, you already did. If you're trying to say something else, I'm still listening." He left the letter unsealed on the desk and went to bed. The window cracked open so he could hear the rain. Sometime after midnight, he woke. The rain had stopped. The apartment was still. He sat up slowly, feeling that strange pull again, the sensation that he was not alone. He turned toward the desk. The letter was gone. Only a single rose petal lay where it had been. The next morning arrived pale and silent. The rain had gone, leaving the city rinsed clean, the air fresh enough to feel almost new. Ethan moved through his morning in slow motion. The coffee, the blinds, the door, the lights. Everything the same as always, and yet nothing felt the same. The missing letter haunted him. He'd checked every inch of his apartment, every step of the staircase, even the floor of the shop below, thinking maybe he'd dropped it without noticing. But no, it was gone, vanished as quietly as it had come. The only trace left was that single rose petal, now dry and faintly fragrant. He kept it in a small jar beside the cash register. Customers came and went. He smiled when he needed to, rang up purchases, stacked books in the window. But his mind kept drifting to the same thought. She was leading him somewhere. These weren't just random notes. They were a map drawn in words and memory. By late afternoon, the sunlight had turned warm and orange, spilling across the wooden floorboards. The bookshop always looked most beautiful at that hour, when the shadows grew long and the dust turned to gold in the light. He stood behind the counter, gazing absently at the row of letters lined up before him like ghosts. That was when he noticed the old drawer beneath the register. It had always been stuck, its handle rusted, and its lock half broken. He'd tried opening it once when he first bought the shop, but gave up after a few minutes. Now, without really knowing why, he reached for it again. It slid open easily. Inside lay a small photograph, curled at the edges, the colors slightly faded. It was her, Eleanor. She was standing beside the front door of the shop, wearing that same navy blue dress, the one from the day they met. Her camera hung loosely around her neck, and she was smiling at someone, just out of frame. Ethan's heart began to thump. On the back of the photograph was a faint message in her familiar handwriting. "You'll find me where the river forgets its name." He frowned. It sounded like one of those poetic things she used to say, a phrase that seemed meaningless until you looked closer. But there was no river in this part of town. He turned the picture over again, tracing the outline of her smile with his thumb. Beneath the faint scribble of ink, there was something else, the edge of another piece of paper glued beneath the photo. Carefully, he peeled the backing away. Another note. Don't follow me out of guilt. Follow me if you still believe we were real. He sat down slowly, the room spinning a little. The clock ticked quietly behind him, marking time that suddenly felt heavier. That night, after closing, he searched maps on his computer. There was only one place nearby that fit her strange phrase. A stretch of the river outside the city where two smaller streams merged, and the local fishermen jokingly called it the place where the river forgets its name. He had been there once, years ago, with her. They'd taken a day trip one Sunday afternoon, back when everything had still been simple. She'd photographed the water, laughing at how the currents tangled together and became one. "That's what I want us to be," she'd said. He remembered it now, as if she were whispering the words into his ear again. By dawn, he was already driving. Chunk 6, the river and the silence. The road curved lazily along the water, winding between fields of tall grass and clusters of oak. Morning mist floated low across the ground, softening the edges of everything, turning the world into a painting. When he arrived, he parked beneath the same willow tree they'd once sat under years before. The air smelled of damp soil and the faint sweetness of wildflowers. The river was slow today, its surface still except for the occasional ripple of a passing fish. He stepped out, listening to the sound of his shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth. For a long while, he just stood there, taking it all in, the quiet, the cool air, the faint rustle of reeds. Then he saw it, a small wooden box resting on a flat stone near the riverbank, half hidden under a scatter of fallen leaves. His chest, he opened another. "The doctor said I'd have time. They were wrong. I thought if I left first, I could save you the hurt. But I see now that running only hurt us both." He kept reading. The letters spanned years, tiny glimpses of her life after she left, written from places she'd traveled, towns she'd passed through, quiet rooms where she'd sat alone, thinking of him. In one, she wrote, "Sometimes I imagine the shop still smells of rain and pine. I imagine you sitting behind the counter, still waiting for stories that never end." By the time he reached the final letter, the sky had begun to lighten. The mist lifted, revealing the reflection of trees and sky on the glassy water. The last note was different, shorter, shakier. "When the river forgets its name, it becomes something new. I hope you will too." He sat there until the sun rose. The letters spread across his lap like petals. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of the water, and for the first time in years, Ethan let himself cry. He didn't cry loudly. It wasn't a sound of despair. It was quieter, smaller, almost peaceful, like the sound of rain returning after a long drought. He gathered the letters back into the box, tied the ribbon again, and whispered, "Thank you." When he looked up, the sun had reached the water. The light shimmered across the surface in waves of gold. He stood there for a while longer before walking back to the car, the sound of the river following him like a heartbeat. The drive back into the city felt unreal. The sun was already climbing, brushing pale warmth across the windshield, and for the first time in years, Ethan didn't mind the sound of the traffic. He drove with the window half down, letting the wind move through his hair. The world looked sharper now, the colors deeper, the sounds more alive. He felt the way the road curved beneath him, the gentle rhythm of the tires against asphalt, the hum of the engine steady and low, like a heartbeat that had found its rhythm again. He didn't rush. There was no hurry anymore. For years he had lived in waiting, waiting for a letter, a reason, a closure that might never come. But the box of letters had changed something. There was peace in knowing the truth, even if it came too late for them to share it. When he finally parked in front of the shop, the city was stirring into its midday calm. The same delivery truck idled across the street. The same florist was setting out bouquets by the corner. The same barista waved from the cafe window. It was all exactly as it had been. And yet, in some quiet way, everything was different. Ethan unlocked the door and stepped inside. The shop smelled as it always did. Old paper, cedar shelves, faint traces of tea. But beneath it all was something lighter, like the first breath after rain. He walked to the counter and set the box of letters down gently, as though placing something sacred. The sunlight filtered through the window and caught the edges of the envelopes, making the wax seals glint faintly red. He took a deep breath, opened his notebook, and began to write. Not to her this time, not even about her. Just words, fragments, things he hadn't said in years. The pen moved almost on its own, tracing out scenes and thoughts and half-finished sentences. It felt like waking from a long, quiet sleep. Some loves are meant to stay unfinished, he wrote. They're the stories that remind us to keep reading, even after the last page. Customers came and went. He greeted them all, smiling softly, like someone who had remembered a secret about the world that others hadn't yet noticed. When children came in, he offered them bookmarks shaped like roses. When couples wandered between the shelves, he caught himself smiling at how they brushed hands as they passed. That evening, as the sun began to set, he arranged the letters in the front display case, not as decoration, but as a quiet offering. He didn't label them. He didn't add context. He just placed them beneath the glass, a soft light shining over them. The next day, people began to ask, "Are these real?" They'd whisper. Ethan always answered the same way, with a half smile, his voice gentle. They're part of a story that still hasn't finished. Soon, more letters appeared, not from Eleanor, but from others, visitors who came and left notes behind. Strangers wrote to lost loves, to old friends, to versions of themselves they'd left behind. The case filled slowly with new voices, new stories. The shop began to feel alive again, as if it were breathing. And at night, after closing, Ethan would sit by the window with the light off and the street lamps glowing outside. He would open one of the new letters, any letter, and read it aloud softly, his voice low, steady, the kind that could lull even the restless into calm. He didn't know if anyone could hear him, but that didn't matter. The act of reading was enough. Sometimes, he thought he saw her reflection in the glass, the curve of her smile, the glint of her camera lens. Not as a ghost, not as a haunting, but as a memory that had learned how to stay. A few weeks passed. The shop had become something different now, not just a place to buy books, but a kind of sanctuary. People lingered longer. They left notes tucked between pages, under teacups, inside old novels. Some came to talk, others just to listen. Ethan no longer felt the same ache when the rain began. He welcomed it now. On quiet afternoons, he would leave the door open just enough for the sound to drift inside. That soft, rhythmic patter that once reminded him of loss now felt like heartbeat and renewal. One afternoon, as the rain began again, he found a new envelope waiting on the counter. It wasn't sealed with wax this time, just folded neatly, the paper soft from being held. There was no name on it, but something about it made him pause. He opened it carefully. "You don't know me. I came to your shop last month. My husband died last year. I haven't been able to sleep since, but I found one of your letters in the window. The one that said love never ends, it just waits. I think I finally slept that night. Thank you." He stood there for a long time after reading it, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. Then he folded it, pressed it flat, and placed it in the glass case beside Eleanor's letters. When the rain stopped that evening, he closed up early. He walked through the city with no destination in mind, just following the rhythm of his steps. The air smelled of wet stone and jasmine. Streetlights flickered to life one by one, each glow spreading across puddles that mirrored the sky. He ended up at the bridge over the river, the same river that had carried her letters. He leaned against the railing, looking down at the reflection of the city lights dancing on the surface. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Somewhere, Deep down, he knew she would have understood. He took one of his own letters from his pocket, a fresh page, blank except for the first line, to all the stories that found their way home. He folded it neatly, held it for a moment, then let it slip from his hand. The paper floated, turning in the air before touching the water and drifting away. He watched until it was gone, until the ripples smoothed out again, until all that was left was quiet. The next morning arrived softly, without ceremony. Light slid through the blinds like slow-moving water, brushing across the floorboards, catching in the corners of the room where shadows still lingered. The city outside was already awake, but it didn't rush him. For the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel the need to hurry either. He dressed slowly, brewed his coffee, and sat by the window as the steam curled upward in thin, lazy threads. The scent of roasted beans mixed with the faint salt of the early air. From this height, he could see the shop's awning below, the street glistening faintly from last night's rain. A young couple passed hand in hand, the woman laughing softly, her umbrella turning slightly in the breeze. He smiled. When he went downstairs, the bell above the shop door chimed its familiar note. The room felt alive already, as though it had been waiting for him. The air carried a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the warmth of something settled, something quietly right. He moved to the counter and found a small package waiting there, wrapped in brown paper. No name, no address, just another of those rose seals. His heart gave a tiny start, not from fear this time, or even longing, but from recognition. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a book, not one of his, a blank one, new pages, smooth binding, untouched. Tucked inside the cover was a short note in her unmistakable handwriting. For all the words you never got to say, now you can. He stared at the paper for a long time. The handwriting was lighter now, less certain, as though written in haste, but it was still hers. The loops, the curves, the soft pressure on each downstroke. He traced the letters with his thumb, half expecting the ink to smudge beneath his touch. For a moment, the shop was completely silent. No footsteps outside, no traffic, no sound at all. The world seemed to pause. Ethan closed his eyes and let the quiet wash over him. He thought of her, the sound of her laughter between the shelves, the way she had once leaned close to whisper something and left the scent of rain in her wake, the way her eyes had always looked like they were seeing something he couldn't yet understand. He smiled. It wasn't the smile of a man who had found what he lost. It was the smile of someone who had learned to live with what remains. He placed the book gently on the counter. Then, reaching for his pen, he wrote on the first page, "Dear Eleanor, I finally learned how to let silence speak. It says more than I ever could." He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. Some words didn't need endings. He left the book open on the counter as he went about his day. Customers came in and out. Some noticed it, others didn't. The bell above the door rang softly each time, blending into the rhythm of the hours. When evening came, the rain returned, not heavy, just a fine mist that made the streetlights glow in hazy circles. Ethan stood by the window, hands in his pockets, watching the droplets streak down the glass. The reflection of the shop lights shimmered across the wet pavement, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw her again, standing just outside, camera hanging from her neck, looking in through the glass. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched. The figure smiled, or maybe it was just the light bending through the rain, and then was gone. He breathed in deeply and let it go. The air smelled like the first time he had met her, paper and summer and rain. Later that night, when the shop was dark and quiet again, Ethan sat in his chair by the counter and flipped through the blank book. On a whim, he wrote a few more lines. Love isn't what ends when someone leaves. It's what stays behind in the spaces they once filled. In the letters, in the rain, in the silence between heartbeats. He closed the book, placed it by the window, and turned off the light. Outside, the rain softened to a hush. The city's heartbeat slowed, its rhythm matching the quiet inside the little bookshop. And Ethan, for the first time in a very long while, felt that rarest of things, peace. He leaned back, eyes half closed, the sound of the rain blurring into something like music. And as he drifted toward sleep, he could have sworn he heard her voice, faint, warm, distant, carried by the rhythm of the rain, whispering through the stillness one last time. Some stories never end, Ethan. They just learn to rest. The light outside dimmed, the pages stilled, and the shop fell into its gentle night silence. The kind that holds both memory and hope side by side. The shop slept beneath the quiet hum of the city. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle, tapping softly against the window panes like fingertips brushing a familiar rhythm. Streetlights glowed in pools of gold, their reflections trembling on the pavement, then fading again with each ripple of the water. Inside, the shelves stood in rows of shadow and memory, filled with stories that had outlived the hands that wrote them. A faint scent of cedar, ink, and tea lingered in the air, the perfume of time itself. Ethan sat behind the counter, eyes half closed, letting the silence settle into him. He could feel the shop breathing, the creak of the walls, the ticking of the old clock, the whisper of the pages when the air shifted. Every sound felt familiar, softened, as though the world had finally chosen to speak gently again. He reached for the journal, the one she had left him, and turned to a new page. His handwriting came easier now. There was no tremor, no hesitation, just the slow, steady flow of words finding their place. Tonight, the rain sounds like it did before I knew her name. Maybe that's what peace is, remembering without breaking. Maybe love isn't what we keep, but what we continue to give, quietly, without asking for anything back. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes when grief becomes memory, and memory becomes something softer, something you can live with. He looked around the shop one last time before closing his eyes. The letters in the glass case caught the lamplight and seemed to shimmer faintly, as though the ink itself was still alive, still waiting to be read. Somewhere among them, he knew, her words would always remain. And maybe, he thought, that was enough. The rain outside steadied again, low and rhythmic, a lullaby written by the sky. It wrapped around the shop like a blanket, like a promise. The streets grew quieter, the lamps dimmer, the world slower. Ethan let out a long breath, leaned back in his chair, and let the sound of the rain carry him. The pen slipped from his hand, landing softly on the counter beside the open page. And as sleep began to take him, the good, peaceful kind of sleep, he imagined her voice once more, close and kind, saying the words she might have written if time had allowed her one last letter. You found me, Ethan. You always would. The rain faded into a whisper. The light thinned. The shop exhaled. And the story, their story, rested there quietly among the others, not as an ending, but as a pause soft enough to sleep to.